Hi everyone, this is Om again, and welcome to another session of Games UX Byte. So, in today's episode, we are going to pick up from where we left in the first episode. If you remember, the first episode was about UX debt. What is UX debt, and how does it accrue? If you missed that episode, feel free to look in the comments below. You can find a link to the previous episode. So, in the last episode, we spoke about UX debt, which is basically, in a nutshell, the additional resources, time, effort, and cost required to go back to a game and optimize its user experience once it has been launched, in order to make it highly intuitive and more user friendly, to take the game to its peak potential of providing the best user experience. And we found that there are many ways UX debt accumulates. We saw three primary reasons that we covered were technical debt, then designed by committee, or designed by stakeholders who are not subject matter experts. And lastly, we spoke about lack of future proofing of a design. So today I'm going to talk about, okay, these are the reasons which lead to UX debt, but how do you go about, resolving the UX debt for each of these three reasons? So I'm going to share my experience, and I would encourage all of you to, share your experience as well. So the very first reason we saw why UX debt accumulates is because of technical debt, which we identified as many times when teams are, in a fail fast mentality. Everything is developed as an MVP. They test out the idea. Once it starts getting traction, they add more content, features, and body to it. But what happens is, because it was built with a very fail fast kind of a mentality, the code which is operating under the game is suboptimal. It's not fully optimized, so it's hard coded. Shortcuts have been made, and because of those hacks, that suboptimal code, it automatically translates into UX debt. Because as a UX designer, you want to create a player journey with feature flows which depend on known mental models, less friction for the player to go from one screen to the other. But it is possible that technical debt is not allowing you to use the most optimal widget. It's creating a lot of friction for the player by huge amount of loading screens, or it's not allowing you to use deep linking, some of the common things which we use as UX designers to make sure that players can move fast, from one screen to the other, or very intuitively navigate through the navigation of the game. So in my experience, the best way to resolve technical debt is, remember that it's not in your hands. You can create the design for it, but you have to convince your stakeholders, dev, tech, product, that hey, we need to improve this piece of technology, this piece of code, because it will result in greater user experience. And one of the best ways I've seen it work is creating what we call a UX UI backlog. So I'm sure a lot of you create a UX UI backlog, but in a nutshell, a backlog is basically a list of all the improvements from big to small that you want to make in your game, different parts of your game. And ideally, it should also be prioritized, like P1, P2, P3, nice to have. And that prioritization should happen, what we call a backlog grooming. It should happen in a session with your key stakeholders, each one talking about, okay, if we make this improvement, what is the impact, what is the KPI we are looking for. Some of those might be just nice to have, which we say, okay, they might not bring you a great amount of conversion or retention or engagement, but they will offer the user a much better user experience. And even those ones are worth fighting for, because a lot of horse trading happens. But the very first step is, take all these improvements, log them in a backlog. You can keep it in in Jira or any other management task tracking tool you use. Even in Excel is fine. But what is important is you have the backlog as a team, and you are grooming it. And the way to execute on this backlog is, as we know, like each feature sprint, especially when a product is live and has not been around for too long, the focus is on creating new features. But what you try to do is, every time a sprint planning is happening, you say, hey, can we please make some room for small improvements? They might just take a couple of hours or half a day, but that can have a huge impact on improving the user experience, and also for on features that might help kind of with our future designs. So one of the ways I sell it is, I identify the features. For example, let's say, from top of mind, if there's a widget issue, You want to have a widget which allows players to see items which can scroll from left to right, or a filtration system which allows it to be categorized. And right now in your game that doesn't exist because it's additional work. It's something which which the developers have to create from scratch. So the way I try to sell that and encourage my team to sell it is, talk to your dev and product stakeholders and tell them, if we invest time in creating this widget, this form factor, it's not something which will improve what's already functioning inside the game, but we know that the future designs, future features we'll be creating, they can also use this particular widget. Because as a UX designer, you want to make sure that you want to reuse as many widgets as possible. You don't want to create every time there's a new feature, there's a new problem to solve, you're creating a whole new interface. Because if we have a interaction pattern, a widget which works in 3 to 4 different screens, user has already learned it, we can keep reusing it, subject to subject to it satisfying the needs of the feature and seeming intuitive. So many times I'm able to influence the team to work on a piece of technology, because I tell them, okay, it's not only beneficial for what we have in the game now, but it will also impact our future features. This could be widgets, filtration systems, work on loading screens, or Fatui systems, like even things like tooltips. You can say, yeah, we use Fatui and contextual Fatui, but we don't want a full screen pop up in users face every time they want to learn about something. How about creating a tooltip system? So these are just one of examples. But once you're able to prove that, okay, these improvements are reusable, they will not only reap reward in what's currently in the game, but in future you can build a case for it. So you need to build a case for it. And the second way is small incremental improvements. Always find an opportunity, a gap. Okay, we have 2 hours in this sprint which are free, or which we have a developer's bandwidth. Can we please make this VFX tool which can make reward moments more special, stuff like that. Second reason that we saw was design by committee, where we said many times, as a UX designer, you will join a team where you inherit suboptimal designs because the team probably never had a UX designer before, or it was the game designer or product person hacking something through, quickly because they were moving very fast. So now what happens? You have a game which has features which have suboptimal UX design, or where it can be definitely improved, the experience can be improved, but you might be given new features to work on. So the way I tackle this is, there are 2 things to do here. One is what I also called process or culture before process. Anytime you're joining a new team where there hasn't been a UX pipeline or UX process, you are asked to set up a UX process and pipeline, which you should. But I think it's important also to educate the stakeholders. Many of these product managers, game designers, developers, they have a good idea of UX probably, but they might not know about all the aspects of it, or like how important it is to invest in UX, or how to measure the ROI of UX. So what I'm saying is, many times people have some idea of UX in their heads, these stakeholders, but they do not know what value UX can bring, or exactly what is the length and breadth of it. Like many times people just assume, oh, it's just about the placement of a button. I've heard it many times, I'm sure you also, placement of button on an interface. They don't realize it starts way before a game is even put together, and UX is also measured after a player has, or a person has stopped using the product, right? So it's a very holistic cycle. So and it's not their fault. It's just like if I come in as a UX designer and you're talking to me about C++, I won't know anything about it. That's not my area of expertise. So we need to have empathy for these stakeholders, and make sure that we are educating the company in parallel while we are building the process. This can be done through case studies. You can show, okay, what does a feature look like before UX, how it looks like after UX was added, what change in KPIs we saw, what are the different methods and techniques we use. It can be company-wide show and tells, department-wide show and tells, talking about different methods, how we work with players, all that good stuff. So these are some of the ways you can actually build the process, and at the same time make a case for, guys, like if we just focus on building new features which will have good UX, what will happen to rest of our game? So imagine you will end up with the Frankenstein of a game, right? So there are these new features, and I've seen it happen many times, where the features are very seamless, intuitive to play, but then there are these parts of the game which have never received any UX love from a UX designer, or be invalidated with playtesting, and those feel very clunky. So I think that's another way I build a case in these kind of scenarios where I'm like, hey, if we want overall good user experience for the player, then we also need to keep thinking about how to fix issues that we have in our older features and not just keep focusing on the new stuff, because we want a holistic user experience, not a Frankenstein. So again, this can also go into your backlog. For UX debt, you can have a UX debt specific task backlog, but for these improvements, you can have a UX UI improvements backlog. So the same backlog can have different category of tasks which you can front load into sprints to add that incremental layer of improvement. And now quickly we want to talk about the third reason why UX debt accrues, and it was lack of future proofing. So lack of future proofing, we described it as many times as you're working with a team and you get a brief from product managers and game designers, and you believe this is the information I have, and based on it the designer will design a screen or wireframe flows for testing. Now what I do in my team and myself is I encourage the designers to make at least 3 versions of the very same feature, depending on, of course, the complexity of the feature. Like, I won't ask for that in leaderboard, maybe 2 is fine, but all I say is never go with your first idea, right? And that's the core basis of UX. You shouldn't be loving the first idea that you create. That's why you are wireframing or paper prototyping. So whenever a new feature comes in, my first intention is to cross question the developers and designers. Okay, you are saying, just an example, let's say there's an upgrade screen, where a player can upgrade their character or a vehicle that they own or a gun that they own. I'll ask, okay, you're saying there'll be 3 abilities and there will be an upgrade path, and it will only use 2 currencies. Player can use 2 currencies and upgrade themselves. I'll ask, okay, is there any possibility there will be more than 3 skills going ahead? Can it happen? Is there any possibility that there could be a secondary progression path? It's very common for upgrade screens to have dual progression path, level up and rank up, and many times one of these progression path appears later down the line because you want to add more depth to the system. And then what if you are saying player can play just pay for this upgrade by paying with soft currency? Can they ever pay by using hard currency? Can they ever pay for it by using a watch add button? So these are the kind of prompts I'm feeding back to my stakeholders, and I encourage my team to do the same, because you are asking, okay, right now you are saying this is how the feature looks, but we are aware of the genre, we are aware of the trend. Is there a possibility this design will scale? Will you have more abilities? Will you have more ways for player to pay for this feature? Can there be an alternate progression path? Would you ever add more, let's say, if you have a weapon upgrade screen or a character upgrade screen, will there ever be a secondary system of research integrated into it? Or can you add more different parts to the weapon itself to upgrade it? So what you are asking is this right now, this is the way the design looks, but is it possible that more can happen going ahead? And what I found is many times you will get questions like, yeah, that's a good question, it might happen right now, we're not thinking about it, but this is something we should keep in mind. So that way, what you are doing is you're also influencing the game and product design to think into the future, like, yeah, we should be open for these possibilities, because it almost always happens. I've seen, especially games which have been around for long, you have to keep adding more content and depth, because your engaged players will be going through that content very fast, and then they're like, okay, what else is there to do in this game? So often what happens in not only addition of new features, but existing features also get more sub features integrated into them. So with future proofing, what I try to do is, after gathering these additional requirements, I ask by gathering these requirements, I ask my team, or if I'm working myself on the project, to create at least 3 different solutions. And one of those solutions will always be the aspirational. It will be aspirational in the sense it will be the best user experience we can offer to the player, even if we cannot pull it off right now, even if our technology is not let's say capable of delivering that right now because of technical debt. And it also accounts for, okay, future proofing, what all going ahead we can have a watch add button. If yes, I have to create space for at least two more CTAs, while in my current design I only have one CTA. But I have to keep in mind what happens if two more CTAs come in, in this place for upgrade button. What if there's a level up button coming in? What kind of widget improvement I will need? So future proofing. This way you're future proofing your design by, creating the design solution, wireframes and flows which satisfy and are intuitive enough for what the requirements are now. But you're also creating this aspirational vision where you're saying, yeah, we want better SFX, we want better VFX, we want the gun to or the character to jump and shout and have this kind of more celebratory reward movement. And we want to cater for what happens if there are 6 skills instead of 3 skills which we are currently presenting. And then the next step is because you're building low fidelity wireframes at this point, you can definitely run usability tests, which is what I do, just with using low fidelity prototypes, get player feedback. And if players somehow like your aspirational version or parts of it more than your current version, that's another windfall gain, because you can use it as proof to say, hey, we tested all 3 versions. Version 1 performed well enough, people got it, there are few improvements, but the version people like the most, players like most, was this one. So that way you're building more traction, you're building more appetite for making sure by keeping this aspirational design as part of your UX UI or feature backlog, going ahead in the future, once the technology catches up and once you have more time, you can introduce these incremental improvements which you were not able to get it in the first iteration of the feature. So with that, guys, I think we've come to the end of this session, and yeah, I will be back next week with a new topic, but feel free to add your comments and your experience of how you go about solving UX debt. So it's bye for now. Cheers.